want to give you guys a quick intro of Imad. Maybe I'll start with how I met him. It was a little over a couple of years ago when one of his early stage investors, BNY Ventures, first class VCs, really good human beings, they called me and introduced Imad to where I was, in the conversation wearing an investor hat, right? And supporting a family office in Abu Dhabi for a strategic conversation. Long story, right? And about 5 minutes into the conversation, I started messaging the guys. I'm like, guys, this guy is like one of the best founders I ever met. I'm so inspired. Let me give you a couple of numbers, right? Imad is the founder of Carswitch, which is the most successful peer-to-peer or consumer-to-consumer marketplace in the Middle East. This is a business that generates over $100 million in transactions, active in UAE and Saudi. I know you've been on it here. I think Saudi is growing at about 5 times the pace of the UAE. 120 employees, an absolutely spectacular operation. I used Carswitch myself to sell my car. Loved the experience. And like Alex said, we have a shared lack of affinity for some brands in the market. So thank you so much for coming.
It's my pleasure.
We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Emma. So maybe, and this is one of, you're the very first guest we have on a series that we're starting called Meet the Founders, right? And we want to inspire our team with brilliant people like yourself. I know you were a super successful consultant at McKinsey for many years. I want to start with the why. What inspired you to say, I'm going to leave this cushy yet super uncomfortable life of being a management consultant and take on the life of a startup founder?
I think I already met some folks that were in management consulting. There's nothing cushy about it. So I think the leaving, so for me, and to be honest, I expected this to be a more casual chat, and so I'm going to play it quite casually, but you stop me wherever you need to, right? So the honest truth is I'm an engineer by training, but joined McKinsey kind of shortly after graduating, was there a little under 10 years. And I got tired primarily of traveling and of telling people what I think the right answer is and not being around to see that oftentimes it's not necessarily so. And frankly, that the proof is often more in the pudding and you kind of need to do it rather than say it. So I decided to part ways from management consulting. I think why Carswitch? At the time, it was actually quite simple. I thought, maybe arrogantly, that a corporate job would always be there. And so it was kind of simpler in saying now is the time to take a risk. I didn't expect Carswitch to be as long of a journey as it has been. So it's been about 7 or 8 years since leaving McKinsey, but then probably 6 years or five to 6 years since operating. But once you get into something, I think time takes over, right? And it takes a life of its own.
So one of the best things about being a founder, or maybe different from being in corporate, is that you have such a great deal of influence over culture, right? Mm-hmm. How do you think about culture and how do you approach it, especially in the early days? What did you imagine was the kind of culture that you want to build in the business that you want to build? And looking back 6 or 7 years versus where you are now, can you tell us a little bit more about, what inspired you to craft your culture the way you did and how it is right now and how it compares?
Good. That's a great question. I think, and I've obviously made many mistakes and continue to make mistakes and learn. So I'll maybe describe what I went through rightly or wrongly, right? I did not thoughtfully think about culture up front. I think culture was a lot more organic at Carswitch, and we also started really small and kind of grew incrementally into that. And so the culture was more, frankly, my personality. I think one thing that you said really well is the nice thing about being the founder is that you do what you want to do, right? For good or bad. You do what you want to do. And so the culture ended up being what is my perfect working environment for me. And as you're recruiting and bringing people on, you're naturally attracting people that fit that environment in your mind. And so I think cultures, there's not a single right culture, but there's different fits that apply to different places and different businesses. But as long as everybody's aligned on that, I think then that it gels and it works. And I think just because it was built organically, kind of the organization more or less is quite consistent in how we think about things. So in terms of maybe a couple of factoids of what is our culture, for better or worse, I think first of all, we are generally we're all frankly owners of the problem. So nobody really solves problems for you. There is no hierarchy, especially when it comes to problem solving. I problem solve with the interns problem solve with the customer experience, with tech, with product, whoever it is. Problem solving is about facts and discussion and brainstorming. And if everybody is an owner and problem solving is a flat organization, it kind of takes a life of its own, right? Everybody that sees a problem is empowered to do something about it. They don't need approvals. They don't need, there's no process around it. Any customer care agent can discount, can waive, can refund. There's frankly there isn't even a process around it. It's kind of like, just do the right thing. If you don't know what the right thing is, pull in who you think might be able to help you figure that out, whoever it is. And frankly, get it done, right? Solve the problem. And I think that's kind of at its essence, really, culture. Maybe not super glamorous, but it works. And it makes it, I think, a very comfortable environment.
Why C2C and not B2B2C? So to draw a parallel between our business model at Property Finder and your business model at Carswitch, you're a managed marketplace. You take a lot more journey ownership, a lot more, let's say, control or influence over the experience. But in your mind, and particularly, I think this is relevant to a lot of people in this room, because myself included, most people in this room, we joined Property Finder when Property Finder was already in a market leading position. And we're now we continue to battle, not just to maintain our market leading position, and also taking that gap further. You, on the other hand, a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, you decided to take on this challenge where there's already a couple of other marketplaces. Right?
Yep.
Why choose this path, right? And what do you think is your secret sauce to being as successful as you have been?
I think it's a great question. So it was honestly quite fundamental, right? I think our industries are different in that sense. So in the automotive industry, the choices are you buy a car from a dealership or you buy it from a private individual. There's no real estate agent. There's no broker in the middle. If you buy it from a dealership, there's a profit margin, there's tremendous costs, capital, risk that need to be managed. And so the value for money equation is more difficult for buyers. If you go buy it directly from an individual, again, unlike real estate, cars move, they hit things. They're not necessarily in the condition that you think or you would hope that they would be in. And so it becomes a very challenging purchase, very high ticket item, lots of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety. Just exchanging money with a complete stranger is quite difficult. So I think the problem that we were solving may or may not exist in real estate. Also, things have changed, right? But for us in automotive, B2B to C did not address the fundamental issue that we're solving, right? What we were trying to solve, and frankly, what our mission is to make buying a used car a smooth experience. And smooth we define as easy, safe, right? Very importantly, and frankly, good value for money. And I think fundamentally as a business model, dealerships do not end up in good value for money because there's tremendous costs in owning inventory that takes a lot of physical space that needs to be managed. To be fair, other players have looked at the same kind of problem and said, we want to create a smooth experience, but have decided to tackle it differently and kind of build an aggregate dealership. Can I be the Amazon of cars? And can I own all the cars in the world and be the only dealership, right? Carvana, Kazoo, Vroom. That hasn't gone so well, at least in the last couple of years. Carvana, we could discuss because it went kind of up and down. I think generally the way I looked at it, we kind of invented a new business model. We are the real estate agent of cars. That just didn't exist. We're a brokerage, right? We facilitate the transaction and take care of all the pain points in that transaction.
Customer centricity, and I'll tell you one thing that truly fascinated me going through the experience as a seller myself, right? To me, as a seller, the experience was just fantastic. I didn't have to feel through all of the inquiries and people haggling, over 5, 10, 15,000, whatever it is. And then having somebody holding my hand at the transaction transfer, it was a brilliant experience. How do you maintain that level of consistency with every transaction? Or as opposed to just me getting lucky because I'm the CEO's friend?
Yeah, look, to be honest, this was, so the way we started was this was a one-man show. Like literally I onboarded the first customer, I sold the first car, I was the first call center agent. It was literally step by step because we were trying to figure out what is the business model, right? We had the idea, but how do you do it? And going through that process, and I think as founders in new type of concepts, if you don't know what the answer is, you kind of have to do it yourself to figure out the answer. And because I was a consultant and everything was quite structured, right? And broken down in the little steps. And the way I think we try to maintain—
We have so many of them here.
Yeah, well, there you go. Is, if you break any problem down into little itsy bitsy pieces, it becomes a lot easier to standardize those little itsy bitsy. I mean, it's not perfect, but at least you get closer to it, right?
Very cool.
And I think I'm gonna fast forward to probably what I imagine will be a lead-on question. Because we did that, and at first it was all manual. It wasn't tech.
Yeah.
And only after we knew what worked offline, we digitized. And we're frankly still digitized, and we're frankly really behind on that.
Some really interesting AI stuff that you're working on.
That's brand new, right? So that's just now. I think so. We took each offline thing and automated it, digitized it as we went along, and it's still not all digital. But what was beautiful, because we were doing it offline, we also knew exactly how it had to happen. There wasn't really a lot of experimentation on the digitization. Much easier to experiment, on the phone with humans. The other really interesting thing is, tech also moves in parallel. In the last couple of years have obviously been quite mind-blowing on, generative AI and other tools of automation, just WhatsApp, for example, and how WhatsApp has evolved. So it's been a real game changer. The last, frankly, 9 months have really just, so we have 25% improvement in productivity, which basically means less people doing the work to scale because of automation and AI. We've taken each of those steps and actually plugged in many places, ChatGPT, to make facilitating transactions no longer necessarily a human activity, but as much as possible a virtual activity in certain areas. And that enables us to scale more cost effective, more consistent, and so on and so forth.
Was there resistance to that change internally from some people on your team?
On the contrary, actually, everybody has loved it for a very simple reason. We haven't removed humans. Instead, and this is where I don't think AI, at least at the moment, is ready to really take over. There's too many hallucinations on the last 20%. But what we are doing is the mundane has been removed. So actually our customer experience teams have very individual tasks, right? They have to handle random inquiries, repricing, updating sellers, when really what they want to focus on is closing transactions, right? And now you're freeing them up.
Yeah.
And because each task is in our CRM, we also know what's the load of each task. And therefore we know, what do we start with, right? Right now, we no longer, it's kind of hard to find our phone number now. Or at least if you can find it, tell me where it is so we remove it. Right? There's a chat bot on every car. It has all the information of every car. It's inspection report, everything. Why do you want to speak to someone, right? if you even want advice on how much the car should be valued, our chatbot knows every transaction we ever sold. We scrape every site and it tells you every car that's listed everywhere. Humans can't do that. And frankly, our CS team does not want to do that. They'd rather focus on, okay, now you've shortlisted this car, let me close it for you. And so they frankly are loving it because they spend less time on the Monday.
That's super cool. Right, last question. Behind the glamorous, sensational life of a startup founder and CEO, there's a lot of pain.
Yes.
Right? And there's a lot of joy. So for those aspiring founders in the room, right, we really hope to see more and more of our people at Property Finder continuing to grow and one day becoming successful CEOs like yourself. What would be your insights or advice that you can offer some people on our team?
Insights to what, to how to make
to being a founder and what it's like being a founder.
Okay. So not necessarily how to change it, but rather what is it?
Yeah.
Right. I think it is not as glamorous as it may be perceived, or maybe it's not perceived as glamorous. I don't know, but there's pros and cons in everything to life, right? And I often say happiness is a function of expectations. So if you just set your expectations right, it actually is much smoother ride. I think the expectations are you have the freedom to do what you want. And if you pick a topic that you're passionate about, it becomes a lot of fun. You do what you want in something that you enjoy. You hire people to help on the things you don't want to do, right? And you spend more of your time on the things that you love to do. But at the end of the day, it needs to get done. And so obviously there are many things that you might not enjoy that you'll need to go through. So there is pain in the journey. But I think if it's a topic that you enjoy, like I love product, I hate fundraising. But you need money to go to product, right? So you have to go through a little bit to get to what you want. And I think every job, frankly, and every career has a bit of pain and a bit of fun. And you just need to, I think, set your expectations accordingly.
Yeah, fantastic. Imad, thank you so much for sharing with us. Anybody has any questions for Imad?
Hi. So if not for all, for at least most startups, there are 2 day ones, right? The day one of Carswitch, when everyone knew about the company, or the first official day one, and the day one when the thought came to you, when it was conceived, right? So between the 2 day ones, what was the journey like?
Our ethos, I think even and to this day, which is something I'm proud about, is as fast as possible and as sloppy as possible, as long as it's reasonable. Test, adapt, make it better, and evolve. But then if it doesn't work, you can shut it down. And that's literally how it launched. It was within 3 months from when the idea of having a used car marketplace came about to having a live website. Literally nothing before and nothing after. It was 3 months of what is the absolute bare minimum to just get started. We had onboarded, I literally hired one mechanic to be able to inspect cars and photograph them. There was no call center agent. I called the sellers off of classifieds and I outsourced tech to launch the most basic website to just get 40 cars on it. And honestly, it's been that journey ever since. It's the next feature. What is the quickest, dirtiest, but acceptable way to go? And then we'll make it better. And I thought the biggest advantage of doing that is there are so many ideas on that whiteboard that after you started, I just really did not make sense. There's no way that customers would have ever accepted them. And you can easily end up wasting a lot of time. So I don't know if this is the right approach, but that's the approach that we've taken. And we continue to do it today. AI is a great example.
Yeah.
And frankly, everybody's empowered. We take things live as long as they're okay-ish. We are okay with backlash. That's the cost of being able to just do it quickly and see what happens.
Are you becoming less? Sorry, I'm the one. I have to keep asking questions. Are you becoming less bold in these experiments and decisions as your brand becomes bigger? Because obviously you can make mistakes when you're $1 million in sales, but $100 million in sales is a different kind.
No, that's a great point. I don't think it's that we're becoming less bold. I think the cost is higher, the cost to whatever it is you do. And so you do have to get more creative in how you will go quickly. So yeah, you don't open it to the entire customer base. You A/B test, you show. But I think you'll always find pockets where you can test things and can handle the cost of something going wrong, right? Yeah. There's always something that could be done.
Yeah. Andres?
Thank you so much for the insight so far. So I understand Mo mentioned that the business is growing 5 times faster in Saudi. So can you give us some insights about, some of the differences that you're observing between Saudi and the UAE and the potential for, for Carswitch to continue to grow in KSA?
Sure. So there is a much stronger product market fit for us in Saudi Arabia than the UAE. I wish we launched Saudi, frankly, day one and not even UAE, right? That's how extreme it is. So C2C transactions in Saudi represent about 65 to 70% of overall used car transactions. In the UAE, it's more like 40%. So dealers play a larger role, and we are a C2C business model. So dealers don't really factor into Carswitch, at least at its core. So it's a bigger market. The trust factor is much, much lower. So cars are older, they're in worse condition. And I think culturally, there's an affinity around cars. There's no public transportation. If you go to Riyadh, all you see is cars. People trade cars as soon as they graduate school, and that's kind of their side gig. So everybody's kind of in the game. And I think, to be honest with you, it's luck. It's just the product market fit is much stronger. The product is also much more mature because we launched it in UAE, kind of fixed it, got it there, lots of automation, lots of product, etc. And that, frankly, gives it a head start to grow faster. I think the third factor is competition is just almost non-existent, right? There is obviously substitutes to what we do. Haraj is kind of the Dubizzle equivalent, and it's probably Dubizzle times 20. But Haraj is also a little bit like Craigslist, right? So it's, a bit different. It's not as saturated of a market as UAE is. There's probably at least 5 or 6 automotive online plays in the UAE. In KSA, there's 2, maybe 3 if you really want. So it's frankly, though, everybody was telling me Saudi's so much harder. I think for us, Saudi's actually so much easier, right? And it's easier because it's a bigger market, stronger product market fit, less competitive. It just fits. Obviously, there's tons of challenges, right? But yeah, it's just working out very, very well for us.
Actually, I don't know if I can ask this question or not. It's a bit awkward.
I'll let you know.
I would like to know what is the number that you had in your account bank to start this company.
So, sorry, what is, you mean how much money did I
The
have?
budget that you dedicated to start Carswitch.
Okay, so not like my personal bank account. So we launched. So we launched with $1.2 million commitment to run the business. So I guess I did it a bit. It was $1.2 million when we launched, which was a lot more meaningful than, frankly, $1.2 million to launch is right now. So it was a bit sizable, at least in those days. And I think, to be honest, if you want to start something seriously, you need to make sure you have at least some firepower to start it. I think today I would say probably more like $4 or $5 million. It, again, depends on what is the business that you want to start, right? If it's an income generating business, if it's a chain of restaurants, if it's a, I don't know, vet, there's kind of different models. But if you want to go and create the next, Chat GPT, right? You're going to have to invest a lot before you get there. So I think that's things that you really, if anybody here is thinking about starting something, you really need to think through what is the end goal here? Is it an income generating lifestyle business? Is it this business only makes sense at scale, and so I need to get somewhere before it starts to make sense? Is it innovation and it's IP and you're inventing something new? And then what's required to get there? You're not going to start the business with everything you need to start, because nobody will give you that money anyways. They'll want to have milestones and see you there. But I think thinking through what does it take to get started and operate, and the way I got to $1.2 million at the time, which is quite specific, right? 1.2 was how much money do I need for the first 2 years, right? This is what I think we'll do. And of course, everything I thought was completely wrong and totally off, but it's at least the starting point.
Not asking for your bank statement, but
Credit card this time, right?
You were a management consultant, meaning frameworks and structured thinking and that kind of thinking pattern, to being a founder where it's a lot more fluid. You need to be a lot more fluid in thinking, and it's quite chaotic, especially in the beginning. So how did you navigate the shift in your thinking process?
So for me, it wasn't really a shift, to be honest, because I think the useful thing for me was at McKinsey, you kind of do small projects in the grand scheme of things, right? 1 to 3 months, and you shift from one project to another, and within the project, but you boil it down, it's problems that need to be solved. And how do you break that problem down? How do you approach it? And for me, at least that toolkit, that skill set was super valuable, because as a founder, it's really quite similar. It's problems. And how do you solve that problem? And how do you break it down into smaller pieces that can be solved? So it wasn't really a deviation. I was actually quite grateful for that skill set.
Fantastic. Imad, thank you so very
My
much.
pleasure.
We're really, really grateful for your time.
Thank you all for having me. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.